Assassin's Creed Mirage started off as a DLC for the game Assassin's Creed Valhalla, this massive open world game that could take you hundreds of hours to complete if you would like to complete everything, until eventually the people at Ubisoft decided that it was going to be its own game with its own narrative push. It would center around the character Basim, and it would be all about returning this franchise to its roots. The first Assassin's Creed came out 15 years ago, and it brought together this really interesting alchemy of fun, cool parkour that you hadn't really experienced in a video game, and really up-to-date stealth mechanics for that time with a cool sci-fi story. It all meshed and it all worked to create something that had lasting appeal. The Assassin's Creed as a brand and as a game series has changed a lot since then, and people wanted a return to these basics. Unfortunately, Assassin's Creed Mirage tries to do this and ends up being this strange amalgamation that really feels like the worst of both of those different types of games. Mirage focuses on the story of Basim, who is a major antagonist from Valhalla, and his journey joining the organization known as the Hidden Ones, which are the precursor to the Assassins that we know and love from Assassin's Creed. You need to understand his story pretty well, or else you'll be pretty lost while playing Mirage. Basically, he is the reincarnation of a god Loki, which is connected to the meta-narrative of this series. Honestly, I fell off a little bit of understanding all the nuances of the Assassin's Creed lore a little while ago, and it does feel like it's a bit exclusionary, just because if you don't play every single game or read every single book, it's a little hard to know exactly what this wild-ass story is about. But this experience in Mirage is just mostly about Basim in Baghdad, in this one region, the city, and a little bit of the outlying regions, joining this organization and attacking the Ancients, which is, of course, the precursors to the Templars and those sort of enemies that we have in the later games. It's a beautiful experience that really brings together a lot of those disparate elements that we remember from previous games. There's a lot of parkour, there's a lot of combat that can be quite fun, and also there's the reintroduction of some of those seminal tactics that were in the original Assassin's Creed, basically finding clues in a specific region with little activities, and then all of that ramping up to a big central assassination mission in one area that'll have 2 or 3 different ways to complete, at which point your main character kills the big baddie and they give you some narrative that ties into this sci-fi story. It worked 15 years ago. Unfortunately for Mirage, since then, other games have been made, specifically the Hitman series. This game, unfortunately, just hasn't adapted with the times when it comes to introducing assassin-like missions into a game. There's 1 or 2 or maybe 3 different avenues of getting to your main target, but the targets themselves are not interesting, which is something that the original Assassin's Creed, I think, did pretty well. They don't have a reflection in the world. If you do kill them, it doesn't really change much. And worse than that, the areas don't have enough characters that can change the course of the game based on your choices. So one of the great things about Hitman is when you make a choice to go down a specific avenue to try to get to your target, and then all of a sudden you make a different choice, you make a different mistake, you veer off, and that little play place is now different and you need to adapt. The original Assassin's Creed 15 years ago was able to do that pretty well. Mirage doesn't. It just doesn't connect these dots, and it's really strange to me, if this was the new way and this new policy that you wanted to bring in, that you haven't adapted it in nearly 15 years, and in many ways didn't even capture what was great about the original game and how that system worked. It's simple, there's not really an impetus to kill the major bad guy, and there's not really a reflection in the world based on those choices. So let's say they weren't able to grab that. That's okay. You can't really go home again. These games exist in one period in time. Things change. What about reflecting games like Valhalla, which are these massive open worlds that take hundreds and hundreds of hours to complete? Specifically with Valhalla, you had this impetus of trying to take over different regions, and then by doing so, the map changes, the world changes, and how these characters interact changes. In a game like Odyssey, we had the introduction of the male-female protagonists and battling in some of the DLCs with and for the gods. Assassin's Creed Mirage doesn't give you any real reason to play it, unfortunately. Valhalla had the conquest, Odyssey had this interesting story. Mirage doesn't have a strong enough narrative that gives you something like a big baddie or something really compelling, some kind of mechanism that will make you go through the slog that is a lot of these games. But what they do include, and they haven't removed, is submenus on submenus that lead to a million little dumb pointless things that so many Ubisoft games have that fill it up just to fill it up. In the year 2023 of our Lord, I am not going to play any more procedurally generated, do this little side mission that kind of has some of our systems so you can get a coin that might help you in the fun mission. Baldur's Gate 3 exists. Disco Elysium exists. I'm not going to waste my time using these old antiquated systems that have been kind of a staple for Ubisoft games for a long time. And it made sense when you had a massive world like Valhalla or Odyssey that changed based on your choices, that had select baddies, that maybe fed into learning about these different areas. That isn't here. And it really is a shame, because I do think that the old system in place for Valhalla and Odyssey in particular wasn't working. Players wanted a change. Unfortunately, Mirage takes the lessons of the original Assassin's Creed and decides to simply mirror them. There isn't an adaptation, there isn't an evolution, and that just isn't good enough. I don't know how I could possibly recommend this to someone. It's a beautiful game. A lot of the systems work really, really well, but there's so many great games you can play right now that tie in well-made, well-functioning systems with a reason to use those systems, whether it is a strong narrative that ties together really powerful characters that speak to some greater themes and a mythos that's important, or if it allows these systems to interact so perfectly that there's this kind of magical alchemy where you feel like you really achieved something when you completed it. It's not here. And I wish that it was, and I think that it really could be, if they were able to pick one lane and commit. Don't half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing. Assassin's Creed Mirage, unfortunately, doesn't whole-ass anything.